My name is Athena Marsh, and I'm 32 years old. The divorce hearing wrapped up at exactly 11:14 that morning. I remember the time because I couldn't stop staring at the clock on the courtroom wall, waiting for the judge to speak the words that would finally set me free after 6 long years of marriage to a man who had never once had my back. Julian sat 2 seats away at his own table, refusing to look me in the eye, while his mother, Loretta, sat directly behind him like some queen overseeing an execution. For real, that's exactly what it felt like. The moment the judge finalized everything and awarded me my fair share of the marital assets, something inside my chest finally loosened. For the first time in years, I could actually breathe. I honestly believed the hardest part was over. Boy, was I wrong. I decided to stop by the family house one last time. Not because I wanted to relive old memories, but because some of my late mother's belongings were still packed away in the attic. Boxes I had never gotten around to moving during the marriage. The house had belonged to Julian's family for 2 generations. It was also the place where I had spent countless holidays pretending everything was fine, while Loretta made one cutting remark after another about how I wasn't classy enough, sophisticated enough, or good enough for her precious son. I pulled into the driveway, parked the car, and walked toward the front door with my keys still tucked in my pocket. Just a few hours earlier, I had every legal right to use those keys. Loretta was already standing on the porch before I even stepped out of the car. Her arms were folded tightly across her chest, and her face wore that familiar expression I'd seen 100 times before. Pure contempt dressed up as fake politeness. Only this time, the politeness was completely gone. The second I stepped onto the first stair, she moved directly in front of me, blocking the doorway like she was guarding a fortress. "Get out of my house!" she screamed, her voice cracking through the quiet afternoon so loudly that I noticed a neighbor's curtain twitch across the street. "Don't you ever set foot in my house again. Get out!" I stood there quietly for a moment, just looking at her. Then something unexpected happened. I didn't feel small anymore. I didn't feel that old urge to apologize or make myself invisible just to keep the peace. Nope. Instead, a slow, steady calm settled over me because, unlike Loretta, I knew something she hadn't figured out yet. Something that was about to flip her whole world upside down. A small smile crossed my face. Funny enough, that smile rattled her far more than any argument ever could. "Actually," I said, keeping my voice calm, steady, and almost gentle, "I already sold this house." Her folded arms slowly dropped. Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. I let the silence hang there for an extra second, soaking it in. After all, during 6 years in that house, I'd never been allowed to enjoy silence on my own terms. Then I added, just as calmly, "And I also fired your son as CEO." Loretta's expression changed 3 different times in barely 4 seconds. First came disbelief, then confusion, then absolute horror. It was like every ounce of confidence drained right out of her body. She actually took a step backward, almost as if the porch itself had shifted beneath her feet. That's impossible." She finally stammered, her voice suddenly much quieter than it had been only moments before. "You don't have that kind of power. You never did anything for this family except take." That was the biggest lie she'd ever convinced herself to believe. What Loretta never understood, and what Julian never bothered explaining, because it was easier to let his mother think I was nothing, was that I hadn't been some quiet little wife sitting in the background. Years before everything fell apart, I had invested my own savings, used my own business connections, and spent countless sleepless nights helping restructure the company Julian's father had nearly driven into the ground. I owned shares. I sat on the board. I had real influence. But neither Julian nor Loretta ever respected that, because they were way too busy assuming I was just decoration. Loretta's hands started trembling. She reached for the porch railing like she suddenly needed something solid to keep herself standing. "You're lying," she whispered. Even she didn't sound convinced anymore. I slowly shook my head. "No, Loretta. I'm not." The board met this morning, right after my divorce hearing ended. Julian's performance has been under review for months, long before either of us filed for divorce. I simply made sure today's timing was final. I paused and watched every single word sink in. I watched 6 years of arrogance, dismissal, and disrespect crumble right there on her own front porch. You wanted me out of this house, I said quietly as I stepped back onto the driveway. Well, consider it done. I'm not coming back. Then I gave her one final look. But if I were you, I'd sit down before calling your son. Because he's about to tell you something you really, really aren't gonna like. Without another word, I turned around, got back into my car, and drove away. I never looked back once. I left Loretta standing completely frozen on the porch of a house that, technically speaking, wasn't even hers anymore. 3 hours after I drove away and left Loretta standing on that porch, my phone rang. I already knew who it was before I even glanced at the screen. Julian. His name lit up the display. And for a second I thought about letting it go straight to voicemail. Honestly, that would have been the easy move. But then I realized I deserved to hear his voice at this exact moment. So I answered. What did you do? He demanded without even saying hello. His voice bounced somewhere between panic and flat-out anger. My mom just called me freaking out, saying you sold the house and that I'm not CEO anymore. Tell me this is some kind of sick joke, Athena. I was sitting in my car outside a small coffee shop, watching steam curl up from the cup resting in my holder. I let the silence stretch for just a second before replying. It's not a joke, Julian. The board voted this morning. Reynolds presented the quarterly reports and, honestly, the numbers spoke for themselves. You missed 3 straight earnings targets. You lost 2 major contracts to competitors. And the employee culture surveys from the last 2 quarters were the worst this company has seen in over 10 years. I didn't create those numbers. You did. Silence. On the other end of the line. I could hear him breathing harder with every passing second. It was the sound of a man realizing that the safety net he'd depended on his entire life had just disappeared. Without warning. You could have warned me, he finally muttered, his voice cracking just a little. For the briefest moment, I almost felt that old instinct creeping back in. The instinct to protect him, to soften the truth, to make things easier for him, just like I had done throughout 6 years of marriage. Then I remembered every family dinner where his mother humiliated me, while he sat there saying absolutely nothing. Every sarcastic remark he ignored. Every insult he let slide. Every single time he chose comfort over courage. Every time he stayed quiet instead of standing beside his own wife. No, Julian, I answered calmly. I tried warning you for 2 years. I sent reports. I flagged the financial trends during board meetings. I spoke to you privately more than once. And told you the direction you were taking the company wasn't sustainable. You told me to stop worrying about things that weren't my concern. Remember that? Well, today it became my concern. And the board agreed. For another moment, he didn't say a word. When he finally spoke again, his tone had completely changed. The anger was gone. Now it sounded desperate. This is because of the divorce, isn't it? He asked quietly. You're getting back at me. I couldn't help laughing. Not because I wanted to hurt him, but because the accusation was so unbelievably predictable. No, Julian. This isn't about revenge. This is about a company that employs 412 people. 412 families depend on that business. They deserve leadership that actually shows up, makes smart decisions, and accepts responsibility. This is about accountability. Something neither you nor your mother has ever had to deal with. I heard him trying to respond. Maybe he wanted to argue. Maybe he wanted to apologize. Maybe he finally wanted to explain. Honestly, it didn't matter anymore. I'd already said everything that needed to be said. So I ended the call before he could finish. For the first time in years, I didn't feel guilty about hanging up. I felt free. Later that evening, I met Priyanka Ose, the newest independent director on the board, at a quiet restaurant downtown. We were there to discuss the company's leadership transition. Months earlier, Priyanka had been the first person to approach me privately. She'd quietly placed spreadsheets in front of me that confirmed everything I'd already suspected. Julian wasn't just struggling. His leadership was slowly sinking the company. "The board's unanimous," she said as she slid a folder across the table toward me. "They want you to step in as interim CEO while we conduct a full executive search." She smiled. "Your restructuring work years ago is still the reason this company survived its worst financial quarter." People remember that, even if Julian's family conveniently forgot. I looked down at the folder resting in front of me. It felt heavier than paper should have felt. Then I thought about the woman I used to be. The woman who sat silently at Loretta's dinner table. The woman who forced fake smiles while swallowing insult after insult. The woman who kept shrinking herself just to keep everyone else comfortable. She didn't exist anymore. Somewhere between filing for divorce and sitting in that restaurant, I'd rebuilt myself into someone completely different. Someone who no longer needed permission to recognize her own worth. Someone who didn't need anyone else's approval to know exactly who she was. I looked up at Priyanka. "I'll accept," I said. "But only under one condition. We bring in real oversight. Real accountability. No more family favoritism pretending to be leadership." Priyanka smiled, lifted her glass slightly, and nodded. "That's exactly why the board chose you." Those words stayed with me long after dinner ended. As I drove home that night, I passed the very same house where Loretta had always believed I'd spend the rest of my life quietly accepting her cruelty. Funny how fast things can change. Just hours earlier, she had stood on that porch screaming for me to leave. Now she was standing there completely powerless, guarding a house that wasn't even hers anymore. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel bitter. I didn't even feel the need to celebrate. What settled inside me instead was something far more valuable. Peace. The kind of peace that only comes after years of finally choosing yourself. For so long, I had measured my worth by how much I could endure. How much disrespect I could tolerate. How many sacrifices I could make. How invisible I could become just to keep everyone else comfortable. Not anymore. That version of me was gone. Somewhere between signing the divorce papers, standing up in that courtroom, facing Loretta on the porch, and ending that phone call with Julian, I'd found the woman I'd nearly forgotten existed. A woman who knew her value. A woman who refused to apologize for succeeding. A woman who wasn't afraid to make the hard decisions, even when they upset the people who had underestimated her for years. Julian's family always believed they were the ones in control. They assumed money, family ties, and old traditions would protect them forever. They figured I'd always stay quiet, always clean up the mess, always put their needs ahead of my own. Boy, were they wrong. Respect isn't something you inherit. Leadership isn't a family heirloom. And loyalty doesn't mean staying silent while people treat you like you're less than you are. Those lessons came way too late for Julian and Loretta. But they came exactly when I needed them. The board hadn't chosen me because I was Julian's ex-wife. They hadn't chosen me out of sympathy. They chose me because I'd already proven what I was capable of long before anyone bothered giving me credit. Years earlier, I'd helped save that company when almost nobody believed it could survive. I wasn't stepping into that office because of revenge. I was stepping into it because I'd earned every single bit of that opportunity. Big time. As I continued driving, the city lights reflected across my windshield. And for the first time in years, my future didn't scare me. It excited me. There were still challenges ahead. Running a company wasn't going to be easy. Rebuilding trust inside the organization would take time. Some people would question me. Others would doubt me. That's just life. But this time, I wasn't walking into the future looking for someone else's approval. I was walking in with confidence, with experience, with strength I'd fought hard to build. And that made all the difference. Loretta thought she had thrown me out of her house. The truth? She had unknowingly pushed me toward the life I was always meant to have. Julian thought losing a wife would be the hardest part of his divorce. He never imagined he'd also lose the position he'd taken for granted. Actions have consequences. Ignoring problems doesn't make them disappear. And protecting someone from accountability only delays the inevitable. Eventually, every choice comes due. Mine led to freedom. His led to a reckoning. As I pulled into my driveway, shut off the engine, and sat there for a quiet moment, I smiled to myself. Not because I'd won. Because I no longer needed to. That chapter of humiliation was finally over. Permanently. I wasn't the woman who had been ordered to leave a house anymore. I was the woman who decided who stayed, who left, and who would lead a company built on real effort instead of blind family loyalty. That, buddy, was a feeling no one could ever take away from me. If this story resonated with you or reminded you that knowing your worth can change everything, do me one quick favor before you head out. Hit that subscribe button and join the community. Because there are plenty more stories just like this one. Stories about ordinary people who stopped making themselves smaller for everyone else, and finally stepped into the life, respect, and confidence they deserved all along. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next.